It is possible to overcome the energy crisis in South Africa and build a sustainable energy future. Solutions do exist, and some are leading the way. South Africa is in the midst of a landmark power crisis which has resulted in devastating short-term and long-term effects on South Africa's economy and its people. With increased load shedding and the rising and crippling cost of electricity, municipalities play an integral role in helping to resolve the energy crisis by providing alternative, innovative solutions to allow the South African electricity supply industry and their economies to regain lost ground and hopefully put the country on a path to accelerated economic growth. The South African landscape and electricity supply industry is changing rapidly, and as the market evolves, the incentive for municipalities to procure their own power becomes more evident. Decarbonisation owing to climate change is a key motivation to transition to green energy, but as electricity costs accelerate and load shedding increases, municipalities are forced to future-proof their strategies in order to provide access to affordable, sustainable energy for all. In this Future Cities Africa episode, we first look at how the City of Cape Town is dealing with the energy crisis, whereafter we take a look at the transformation of the electricity supply industry in South Africa. My guests today are Kadri Nassiep, Executive Director for Energy at the City of Cape Town, and James Beatty, Chief Executive Officer at Enpower Trading. Kadri, welcome. It's lovely to have you on the show again. What is the City of Cape Town's vision to achieve green, affordable, and sustainable energy for all?
Well, firstly, thank you for the question. And yes, the most important consideration for us as a city is the ultimate migration to an energy secure future, an energy market which is then dominated by private sector participants. We believe very strongly that competition will be healthy and that we should be able to wean ourselves off an energy supply from Eskom, which is neither affordable or reliable at the moment. And so we see that as being critical to our plans to ensuring a smooth transition ultimately to an energy system which is decarbonized. And certainly by 2050, we would see that Cape Town itself would be a net zero carbon city. At the same time, we would have, as I said earlier, an open competitive marketplace dominated by generation coming through from third parties, as well as the establishment and the growth of a prosumer market where consumers, both residential as well as commercial, are able then to install solar arrays on their premises and be able to export the extra power back into the city. So a lot of effort has gone into developing these systems and these processes that are designed to open up the marketplace. And I'll be happy to share with you quite a few ideas in terms of where we are in terms of progress with a lot of those initiatives.
Please may you summarize the municipality's energy strategy both in the short and in the long term.
Well, our energy strategy is, of course, guided by the current environment that we find ourselves in, which is, of course, dominated by the load shedding crisis. And so, for us, an integral part of our energy strategy will be the stabilization of our network as a response measure to the crisis that we're experiencing. Beyond that, we want to take into consideration, I think, other factors as well. That includes optimal utilization of our resources. And those resources could be natural resources, they could be financial resources, human resources, etc. But then also looking at poverty alleviation within the city, noting, of course, that the current high prices of electricity are not conducive to growth of the economy, and in particular towards sustaining any form of reasonable lifestyle for indigent members of our society. Over and above that, of course, there has to be this transition to what we would call a future fit utility, where the current price shocks, as well as the trend which is away from the grid supply, obviously it has an impact on revenue collection for the city going forward. So we have to restructure ourselves to be more aligned to the needs of our communities, while at the same time taking into consideration the growth aspirations of the organization as well to better serve its customers going forward. Ultimately, our goal in the energy strategy is to reach a transition to a far more sustainable energy platform, one which, as I've said before, also talks to decarbonization. So if you were to look at 2030, for example, our goal would be for, let's say, all city buildings to be net zero carbon, and then ultimately to align that to our goal of being a net zero carbon city by 2050. So the energy strategy must talk to our decarbonization goals while at the same time ensuring in the short term that we help mitigate the impact of load shedding, while at the same time looking ahead and making sure that the optimal future marketplace looks the way that it should look.
Can you highlight some priorities or programs implemented to enable and drive change within the energy system?
So there are a myriad of opportunities that we've identified, and in fact, we're actually in the process of implementing right now. So, for example, on the side of supply side, we have already engaged the market with two different tenders. The first tender is for embedded generation, and there we're looking to award up to 200 megawatts of power, and that tender opened up in February of last year. And hopefully we'll conclude the second phase of that, which is it's a two envelope tender system. So we're looking to wrap up the whole process towards the end of this financial year, or rather this calendar year, which will take us to about December. The second tender, which went out in April, looks at dispatchable power, and the difference being that on the embedded generation side, we're primarily targeting solar installations, but connected directly to our grid. With the dispatchable one, we're looking at power that's more baseload in nature, and it can actually meet the needs of the city during peak periods, but also as and when required. And that's really the kind of technology that is required for mitigation purposes. And we must bring this back to the mayor's goal of ending load shedding over time. And in fact, in regards to our programs that we have in place with the mayor, our objective is to reduce the impact of load shedding by up to 4 stages, and we have less than 36 months in which to achieve that. So we've made lots of strides forward in terms of engaging the market, and we will hopefully be awarding tenders towards, as I said, the end of this calendar year, possibly early into the new year. But certainly we would look to putting on at least 200 megawatts of embedded generation, and on the dispatchable energy side, about 500 megawatts. Those projects should be commissioned between 2025 and 2026. And so that will really give us quite a bit of breathing space on the mitigation side, but I think also open up the marketplace to independent third-party generators. Aligned to that, of course, we also look at the notion around demand-side management, or in this particular case, demand response. And there we put out a tender as well during the course of the year, during the course of last year, and the tender is focused around being able to reduce the load, in particular geyser load, during peak periods, or in fact during other periods of load shedding, and to do that up to one stage, which is roughly 60 megawatts of load that has to be shifted. So in that particular case, we've put out a tender for what we call an aggregator. An aggregator would be a third-party supplier or contractor who was able to pull together all the residential households in terms of being able to manage the reduction at a centralized level, but they take care of the individual installations on our behalf. So we've gone to market to find an aggregator. We're now in the process of looking at the contracting phase after having awarded the tender to a preferred bidder, and hopefully they'll be up and running within the next few months, subject to any appeals that might be lodged in regards to the actual award. But as I said, that will hopefully give us another 60 megawatts in terms of load shedding capability. Now, in terms of accessing the market and opening up that marketplace, we've also allowed for wheeling to take place. And so we've now engaged the market with respect to a pilot project. We have about 15 projects that are part of the pilot at various stages of development. And there, the expectation is that we'll be able to sort out the regulatory elements. So that we'll look in particular at the contracts that are applicable between Eskom and the third-party generator, as well as the contracts between the generator and ourselves as a city. And then lastly, also the contracts between the city and the customer, where we still remain the supplier of last resort. So there is a contractual arrangement that needs to be finalized between all parties concerned, and that is being tested during the pilot phase. In addition to that, the transactions that will be metered and monitored on a 30-minute interval basis, those also have to be properly tested, and the data used from that will be used to allow for improvement of the system before we open it up to the entire marketplace. So that is definitely a part of the plan on our side to open up the marketplace. Lastly, just to mention on the small scale embedded generation, we have in the course of last year also opened up the program to allow for our commercial customers to start exporting more power than what they actually consume from the grid, which turns them into true prosumers. And we're now in the process of engaging with those that have applied for that program now to ensure that we can actually actively refund them or credit them with the balance of the power, the value that comes with that after they've cleared their municipal account. So we actually are a long way down the road in terms of that process as well.
The only way to ensure the security of energy supply and eliminate load shedding over time is to get more generation online. Electricity generation by the private sector is more accessible than ever and provides an opportunity to generate utility scale electricity quickly. How is the city creating an enabling environment for the private sector that is mutually beneficial to both the municipality and the private sector?
Well, I think certainly if you look at the tenders that are out, particularly the embedded generation one and the dispatchable energy one, those are designed to create long-term opportunities for the private sector to provide us with their power for their independent generation. So the embedded generation tender, for example, will have a 20-year power purchase agreement, which I think is very favorable, particularly for solar projects, and aligns itself very well to the National Renewable Energy IPP procurement program. Also, on the dispatchable energy side, we've opted for a long-term contract, but in this particular case, we'll have 10-year power purchase agreements. And that is because we're dealing with substantially larger projects, and we have to keep an eye on what's intended to happen with load shedding in the future, just to make sure that we don't sit with stranded assets, both as ourselves, as a purchaser of power, as well as a generator, for example, that's taken a lot of the technical and financial risk on their shoulders as well. So we're certainly mindful of the possibility that load shedding might end, and so therefore we've taken a more risk-averse approach in terms of placing those contracts for 10 years. On the demand response side, for example, we've also looked at 7-year contracts just to make sure that we align ourselves also to what we think would be the extended time frame attached to load shedding, and then to make sure that our demand response program mirrors what we think would be a realistic timeline for that. Of course, there's no restrictions in terms of small scale and generation, so we've opened up that marketplace, as I've said already, to the commercial sector. And within the next year or so, we are likely to open that up to the residential sector to also allow them to export more power than what they're currently consuming from the grid. So a change from the status quo will happen. So certainly we're doing everything in our power to ensure that the third-party generators, as I've mentioned, the wheeling to you as well, have access to our customers, they have access to the network, and they are able to, in fact, even sell power to us. We're also in the process of reviewing trading platforms to see if we should be joining these platforms and use them as the basis to engage the market. So that's looking very likely at the moment, that we'll be choosing 1, 2, or maybe even 3 platforms, and in future bids would be handled through these platforms, and it makes it a lot easier for us. It also allows us to enter into shorter term contracts, which is something that we're quite interested in doing, obviously from a risk perspective. So quite clearly there will be opportunities even there for the private sector to play a bigger role, noting of course that the trading platform would operate nationally and possibly internationally, which means that generators within the Western Cape or the city of Cape Town will have access to off-takers both within the city as well as in the province and nationally. So very exciting times ahead in terms of opportunities for the private sector.
What prompted the municipality to decide in principle to open up to electricity wheeling?
Wheeling is actually allowed for in terms of the NRS specifications that govern the use and management of our network. So access to third parties is guaranteed. So that is a consideration on our side that we've had to take into consideration. However, on a voluntary basis, we also believe very strongly that our consumers have the right to choose the supplier that they would like to have, provide them with electricity, particularly if the source of power is clean, green, and actually meets their needs from an international competitiveness perspective. So many of the customers that have signed up for the pilot project, for example, would have such a requirement where, because of the commodities that they produce and export, or by virtue of their brand, that they would prefer to have clean power. So it's not just a load shedding mitigation measure. It talks to the strength and of their brand and how they would like to actually approach the production of their commodities using clean power. So that has been a powerful motivator for us as a city. And that has also allowed us then to develop a wheeling framework that takes into consideration the needs of our customers, but also in an effort to protect the revenue that is required by the city to fund other services, for example, public lighting, etc. So it's a balancing act of trying to make sure that we keep our customers happy while at the same time ensuring that the coffers aren't depleted to allow us to continue to provide the quality of service that we expected to provide for and what we would like to see going forward as being truly a hallmark of a city of hope, which is what Cape Town is.
What are some of the key challenges experienced and what is preventing growth?
Yeah, so I mean, the challenge with wheeling is that, I mean, you need to have power that's available somewhere outside of the city of Cape Town, of course. That's why it's wheeling. And not all of the generators, for example, have been able to put their projects together because obviously a critical requirement for any project of this nature has to be the offtake. And until the wheeling component had been resolved, there's no clear indication that the offtake itself would be secure until the city has agreed. So the city has made itself available to support these wheeling projects, which I think is great. But there are concerns, particularly around the contracting side, which is why we've asked that the participants also participate in the process of the vetting of the contracts that govern this particular framework. An important consideration in all of this is the role of the regulator. And the regulator is really expected to approve the wheeling framework. And there have been challenges in respect of getting the regulator to approve our wheeling framework. They've taken an inordinately large amount of time to come to any decisions around that. In fact, we don't even have clarity at this stage on that. But also the wheeling tariffs. I mean, periodically the regulator will not approve a wheeling tariff for whatever reason. And this is quite subjective and seemingly also quite random because in one year they would approve a wheeling tariff, but in the next year they wouldn't approve a particular tariff. And there's no clear reasoning given as to why not. So I would say the role of the regulator is critical to the process, but at the same time also one of the biggest concerns where potential challenges could exist.
Regarding the City of Cape Town's electricity wheeling research pilot, what is the purpose of this pilot and what has the progress been to date? And what are the city's plans to scale beyond the pilot?
If you look at the wheeling pilot, the intention was to test, first of all, the SAP module that we use for the metering billing side of things, bearing in mind that we are reconciling on a half-hourly basis, which is a lot different to ESCOM, which chooses to reconcile. I mean, they still capture information on a regular basis, but they choose to do their billing reconciliation on a monthly basis, whereas we would choose to do that on a half-hourly basis. So it's quite data intensive and it requires the right tools in place. So we've had to put all of that together as part of the pilot project. As I said, we've also had to put together the legal framework, the rules that govern wheeling, which have also been made available to the regulator and the participants. And then lastly, of course, the contractual side of things where we have to look at the vetting of the new contracts that have to be put in place. So all of those effectively come together as part of the pilot. So before we could open this up to the marketplace, we had to make sure that our systems work, that the participants are happy with the tools that are being used, as well as the legislative environment, which makes it so much easier for them. So we would anticipate that probably by the end of this calendar year, we should be ready to go to market in respect of opening up the wheeling program to all participants, and hopefully by then all the lessons that we'd have hoped to have learned during the pilot would be there. It's not always easy to run a pilot project of this nature. As I said to you, we have challenges such as the availability of generation capacity. So we cannot test the metering and billing system if there's no generator. And so that's been one of the big problems we've had. So we have categorized the projects based on proximity. So projects on the city's network would go into category A. And then, of course, depending on when you were ready to construct, we will then also differentiate you. So if you were ready to generate right now and you were in the city of Cape Town, you would go into the category A1, for example. But if you were not ready to generate, then you fall into a category A2. So this is one of the ways in which we try to differentiate as to where people are located and when they'll be ready to generate. And on that basis, we'll be able to test a lot of our systems using those categories of participants. So the 15 have now been split up into those distinctly different categories. So once we get all the lessons learned out of that, and as I said to you, we would take time because of the nature of these projects. And once we feel comfortable with the results that we've got, we will certainly be opening up the program to all participants.
James, welcome back. It's great to have you on the show again. What role will Enpower Trading play in the transformation of the electricity supply industry in South Africa?
The first, I think, and most important aspect that trading will, let's call, realize in the new ESI is this concept of, a private marketplace, right? So the private trader is buying power from a private supplier, whether it be an IPP or a small embedded generator inside a municipality or other, supplying that power on the other side to private off-takers. So it's a private system the full way through. You obviously are utilizing or capitalizing on government infrastructure, Eskom's physical poles and wires and network to deliver that power from A to B. And so even Eskom and the government are being paid a fee for that, what's called a wheeling fee. But this concept of a private system, I think, is very important because, for South Africa and municipalities as well, you obviously now have a more bankable solution that's possible for the country, right? So you've got bankable off-takers that are able to off-take this power, which obviously underpins the construction of new power assets in the country. At the moment, obviously, it's just a reality of where we are. Eskom's balance sheet is very encumbered. It's difficult for Eskom to now, I think, contract with new generation that's underpinned by treasury guarantees because we're close to capacity. So I think this is a very important new source of power that is able to get delivered to our market. And in the medium term, we believe that helps to solve load shedding. Another important, I think, related to this in the earlier stages is this concept of aggregation, which we'll touch on later. But aggregation, which is part of the trading or the earlier stages of the trading model, we believe will allow for us to pool together lots of offtake, which creates liquidity in the marketplace. So more offtake that's able to access, frankly, cleaner and more affordable power solutions on the other side. So I think those would be my first sort of two high-level responses to that.
What exactly are the benefits of wheeling for municipalities and local businesses?
One of the major ones is, of course, the wheeled solution allows for customers inside those networks to access cleaner, more affordable electricity whilst remaining on the network's grid, right? So that's very important because what that's allowing for is customers to stay happy, customers to want to remain on the network and not leave the network, and, for example, construct their own on-site solutions, etc., which reduces, of course, revenues for the municipality. So I think the most key one there is the municipality is now able to offer a competitive, clean and affordable solution on their network to customers, obviously via a wheeled product, in coordination or working with traders and IPPs. So I think that's a very important one, being point one. Point two is you've obviously got this concept of energy blending, which I think is important. So energy blending, if you're just a customer in a municipality and you want to build yourself some on-site solar, you're only able to get, let's call it 20 to 30% of your energy requirements from that solar asset, right? So 20 to 30% of your power will be green. The balance of the time you will be receiving, what we call in the terminology brown power. So power from the network, which is of course predominantly coal at the moment. So what this wheeled solution or product allows for is traders like Enpower Trading are able to, in the medium term, pool together actual generations. So let's say some solar, some wind as well blended with that, and that product then is able to deliver renewable penetrations of up to almost 80%, if not more than that. So for customers and big corporates as well that are eager to avoid carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe or hit net zero targets by 2030, or as you've heard before, just frankly want to have green power because that's their preference. This solution, allows for that to meet those targets. So I think those are two very important factors on the customer side. You've obviously got then for the municipality itself some important considerations, kind of linked to the above two as well, which is that without these solutions in place, we've mentioned before that there's a kind of off-grid flight that's occurring in the country, right? Which a bit of in the terminology, sometimes I hear people talk about a municipal death spiral. It's obviously a horrible thing to say, but without these kinds of mechanisms to alleviate some of that pressure on customers are incentivized to take, excuse the pun, but the power into their own hands and just build their own off-grid solutions. So I think very important for municipalities to preserve their revenues by allowing this wheeled solution and product to take place in their grids. At the same time, of course, related to that is this results in job preservation, right? So if obviously we have power still flowing on these networks, all the skilled workers that are working in municipalities can maintain their jobs because, of course, the power is still on the network and customers haven't left. So I think those are all quite linked together and very important factors for municipalities, we believe, to consider.
Looking on a national level, are municipalities struggling to see or understand these benefits?
It's a really great question, Dan. I think, of course, when we entered this market, very much being one of the first players to discuss, use of systems and distribution with municipalities in South Africa, right? So we were under no illusion that this was going to be a kind of, a long game and very much an education journey, very much a discussion with these municipalities that might not necessarily always go so well. It's human nature. I think in human nature, change is often something that's difficult to embrace. People are stuck often in their routine. And so we were under no illusion that this was going to be a tricky process. I think with that being said, we have over our journey developed kind of a playbook of education, if that makes sense. We've really got a kind of well vetted and established process to educate these municipalities. We've been coordinating with some partners in business, the likes of Green Cape and others. We've even been, we've held symposiums across South Africa. You may know about that. So one in George, one recently in Gauteng. I think that initially the education was the most tricky. I think now with our system being live, operational, there's a proven track record in George, and obviously the credibility that the experience from George has given to George and George municipality being able to discuss with their peers. I think that's laid the groundwork for what I would almost view as a second phase that we're in now, where a large part of the difficult heavy lifting in terms of education has been done. You've obviously got the GIZ, you've got consultants like EY, you've mentioned Salga. It's not only been us, of course. There's been a lot of industry that I think is out there and a force for good trying to educate municipalities around the benefits. I would say that for the large metro municipalities, I think obviously, of course, Cape Town being the first with the pilot, I think you're seeing a lot of traction and an understanding around the benefits. Again, from efforts from industry and from proven track record in George and others, you're actually starting to, I feel like there's renewed momentum. So, the short answer is yes, it has been, of course, it's not easy. I think the benefits are quite clear, so we've had to distill our message down into a very simple, message for understanding, which I think is certainly resonating quite well now. And we've certainly made headway with municipalities, and there's been renewed momentum in the last few months compared to before, big time. So I would say, yes, it's been tough, but it's moving forward for sure.
On the grid as being a priority municipal asset, can you expand on the concept of grid-centric versus energy-centric?
Basically, in South Africa, you will be aware that enshrined in the South African Constitution, the municipalities are, of course, manage downstream distribution. So obviously, the distribution in their networks. In a certain sense, a lot of industry understands it almost as if they're resellers of Eskom power, inside those local distribution grids. Now, what's come with that as a legacy is, of course, they are needing to manage all the operations. They're needing to manage all the billing, metering, matching, the coordination of that local network in terms of the actual electron supply. It's definitely been the case in many other markets where opening up a network like that and allowing, so essentially almost auctioning off, in the case of Turkey, that's what did happen, the local networks or the municipalities to private operators, right? So the municipality still owns the physical network or the grid, but they just allow private operators to, I guess, take over the operations of that network. That has created an abundance of growth and productivity in many other markets or places in the world, because you essentially have a specialized private industry that's now operating the network, and it becomes is essentially about getting more electrons to flow through that grid. So the municipality, for all intents and purposes, becomes an infrastructure owner and leases out that network to third-party specialists who, of course, have been, vetted, and there's a long process of understanding who those third parties would be that would be operating on the network. But what has come with that in other parts of the world is certainly been, the private sector has been able to facilitate a lot of productivity, as I've mentioned. Of course, what we call in the commodities world, the throughput, or the amount of electron supply on that network has traditionally increased substantially because you've got specialization occurring, right? The municipality can focus on physical infrastructure, topics such as grid strengthening, spending cash on updating their network, smart metering, all those types of elements. Staff that would be looking after the networks, that type of arena. And then on the other side, you'd have specialized firms who are, experts in their field in terms of grid management of supply and trading on those networks and delivering and managing the network supply to private customers. That form of specialization typically has resulted in enormous gains, as I've said. And my personal view, because of course there's a lot of academic research being run and industry at large in South Africa are looking at this, but my personal view is that I think a big solve for municipalities is allowing this type of framework to be delivered, because as discussed earlier in the conference, we're basically saying that we also believe that mitigates off-grid flights substantially, right? It's all about the customer, right? So this solution, we believe, gives customers access to a competitive, cleaner solution on the network, and therefore is most certainly in the interests of the network owners, being the municipalities, because those customers will remain on the grid. So I think there's a lot there, but you've basically got this concept of moving away from what had previously been an energy-centric mentality for municipalities towards being an infrastructure owner and provider, being grid-centric, essentially. That's the terminology that we've in-house developed.
James, how do we ensure that municipalities don't lose money?
Good question. You may recall from previous episodes between us, Dan, we as Enpower Trading developed a tariff structure called revenue surplus neutral. And revenue surplus neutral is quite a tongueful, I guess, but all it means is that municipalities will continue to receive their earnings with respect to power supply, whether we are operating in their networks or not. So we pay them the same fees that they've always been paying, whether it's us operating in the network or not. So it's very important to understand that, because it basically means that the municipalities are not affected economically speaking. When I say economically, I mean purely commercially on the income side. Their income is protected, right? From opening up this network to a private trader inside the network, the municipality's revenue is protected. So all the benefits that we believe exist, as summarized earlier in the episode, you're able to avail to your customers through this solution, whilst at the same time preserving your revenues, right? I think that's super important because at the end of the day, customer is king. If the customer is not happy inside the local municipalities, and given the regulatory changes we've seen in South Africa, no limits on various different power solutions anymore, government's been made some positive strides on that side. And what that's also done is it's given customers options. So customers have the option to leave the grid, build an embedded generator, put solar on their roofs, etc., all the rest of it. So with those options, if you're not offering a competitive solution to customers on the municipal network, the customers are incentivized, or a lot of them could be, to leave the network. And so I think from my standpoint, that's a very important topic for municipalities, is that protecting or future-proofing their business model is made possible by availing the solution on the network. And so obviously what that creates, in my view, is a virtuous cycle to preserve their income. You've got customers that remain on the network that are able to get more affordable and cleaner power. They continue to buy power, they expand their operations, they're hiring more people. We are obviously, possibly even in the case of, if we're talking about Western Cape or whichever municipality, if a municipality is more competitive than other municipalities, it might even attract heavy industry and big business to come into that municipality. So you could argue that this is a force for good and a way to be competitive and attract more industry and business into your municipality, which again, feeds back into that virtuous cycle of more income and revenue for your municipality. So we think that, again, customer is king. Municipalities need to focus on that. What delivers support and a customer being happy environment is, we believe, the solution, obviously alongside a lot of the other initiatives that municipalities are looking at.
A special thanks to Kadri Nassiep, Executive Director for Energy at the City of Cape Town, and James Beatty, Chief Executive Officer at Enpower Trading, for this insightful conversation on Future Cities Africa.